Carl Jung pinpointed 8 markers of a profoundly uncommon personality. If even 4 of these characteristics resonate with you, you belong to what I term the cognitive vanguard. Throughout his extensive research, Jung found that fewer than 5% of people achieve what he called a differentiated consciousness, a mode of perceiving reality that remains beyond the reach of most. What's truly compelling is that these exceptional individuals often navigate their lives believing they are fundamentally flawed. Jung chronicled numerous cases of people with immense psychological depth who were led to believe by societal norms that their passion, their heightened sensitivity, and their refusal to settle for superficial answers were defects, not indicators of a remarkably advanced mind. The most startling revelation was Jung's realization that these rare personalities aren't merely different, they are evolutionarily ahead. They signal humanity's next leap in conscious development. Join me as we delve into the core of Jungian psychology to reveal these 8 definitive signs of a rare personality. If you see your own reflection in these descriptions, everything you've heard about being too intense will suddenly click into place. It's not that you are too much for the world. It's that the world is not yet enough for you. Because Jung uncovered a truth that contemporary psychology often overlooks. The very traits that make you feel isolated are not your shortcomings. They are your enhancements. You are not malfunctioning. You are a breakthrough. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But what if your true self doesn't conform to society's restrictive definitions of normal? What if your intensity, your profundity, and your refusal to exist on the surface are signs of what I call an advanced psychological architecture? Consider this from an evolutionary standpoint. Historically, the figures who propelled humanity forward were those who could not stomach the status quo. They were the ones who probed everything, felt everything, and perceived possibilities others could not fathom. Yet, here lies the tragic paradox. Society often conditions these unique individuals to stifle their most powerful attributes. You've likely been told you're overly sensitive, excessively intense, or needlessly complex. But Jung saw these supposed weaknesses as hallmarks of psychological differentiation, the rare capacity to process reality on levels most people never access. Modern neuroscience is just now corroborating Jung's theories. Dr. Elaine Aron's work on highly sensitive people indicates that about 20% of the population possesses nervous systems that process sensory data more profoundly. However, Jung identified something even more unusual. Individuals whose entire psychological framework operates at a higher level. But that's not the most incredible part. The most incredible part is that these rare individuals often conceal their abilities, having been conditioned to view them as burdens. You've learned to dampen your own brilliance because others perceive it as a threat. Allow me to unveil the first sign of what I call psychological rarity. Sign 1. You experience an emotional depth that feels almost preternatural. Jung made a fascinating discovery about emotional intensity. He saw that certain people don't just have emotions, they experience what he called affect-toned complexes, which generate a deep psychological resonance. You don't simply have feelings. Feelings are like entire orchestras moving through you. Each one carries layers of significance that others cannot perceive. Here's an insight from Jung that many therapists overlook. This isn't emotional instability, it's emotional sophistication. When you feel profoundly, you are not overreacting. You are tapping into what Jung termed the objective psyche, the collective layers of human experience that most have learned to mute. You sense the unvoiced tension in a room before a single word is spoken. You absorb the emotional undercurrents of every interaction because your mind is wired for depth, not for shallow pleasantries. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. For you, however, everything illuminates pathways to understanding that others don't even see." Sign 2. You question reality with what I call a sacred curiosity. Jung posited that most people lead what he described as unconscious lives, accepting social scripts without question. But you are compelled to dig deeper. Jung would have seen you as someone with a dynamic thinking function that cannot settle for superficial explanations. You don't just ask, "What?" You ask, "Why?" Why do people remain in relationships that diminish them? Why do we uphold systems that fail to promote human well-being? Why do we pretend that trivial conversations equate to genuine connection? Jung labeled this the transcendent function, the psychological capacity to see beyond present circumstances. While others conform to the status quo, you are already imagining what could be better, more authentic, and more honoring of the full spectrum of human potential. But I've learned this about people like you. Your inquiries often threaten the comfortable illusions of others. When you pose deep questions, you're not merely looking for information. You're challenging the psychological defenses that keep people feeling secure within their limitations. If you've been told you ask too many questions or overthink things, comment, "My curiosity is sacred." Sign 3. You have developed what I call conscious independence. Jung stated, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." You have learned to do just that, not by preference but by psychological necessity. According to Jung's findings, rare personalities often achieve what he called individuated consciousness sooner than their peers, typically forged in adversity. Here's what Jung knew that most people don't grasp. Your independence isn't a defense mechanism. It's a monumental achievement. You've learned through hard-won experience that relying on others for your self-worth is like building on psychological quicksand. So, you rebuilt yourself from the foundation up. You stood, often by yourself, and forged an identity that could not be dismantled by someone else's judgment or departure. Jung named this journey individuation, the psychological odyssey toward wholeness. Most people never finish this journey because it demands confronting what Jung called the shadow, all the parts of yourself you were taught to disown. Your solitude isn't loneliness, it's your sanctuary. It is where you reconnect with who you are beneath the layers of roles and expectations. Jung held that this self-knowledge is the bedrock of all psychological well-being. Sign 4. You possess what I call hyperperceptive awareness. Jung transformed psychology by classifying intuition as a valid cognitive function. He wrote, "Intuition is perception via the unconscious that brings forth ideas, images, possibilities, ways out of a blocked situation by a process that is mostly unconscious. You don't simply watch people, you perceive their psychological signatures. You register micro-expressions, shifts in energy, and the unspoken words between the lines." Jung would have recognized this as a sign of what he termed active imagination, the capacity to perceive beyond the evident. When someone claims to be fine, yet their entire energy field radiates distress, you cannot ignore it. When tension permeates a room that everyone else disregards, you feel it viscerally. This is not paranoia, it is psychological acuity operating at a level most people never attain. But Jung cautioned that if you fail to protect this sensitivity, it will deplete you. You risk becoming an unconscious therapist for everyone you meet, managing conversations and shouldering pain that is not yours. Sign 5. You crave meaning above all else. Jung remarked, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But what if being true to yourself requires rejecting everything society dictates you should desire?" Jung found that certain personalities are psychologically unable to lead inauthentic lives. You don't simply choose meaning over social standing. Your very psyche demands it. You have likely attempted to live for external approval, to follow pre-written scripts, and to play the expected parts. Jung would have diagnosed the symptoms immediately. That pervasive emptiness, that feeling of betraying something vital, that quiet desperation lurking beneath any praise. According to Jung, when you live in opposition to your psychological type, you don't just feel out of place. you develop neurotic symptoms. Your psyche literally revolts against inauthenticity. You cannot pretend that superficial goals are fulfilling. You cannot muster excitement for accomplishments devoid of substance. You cannot forge relationships based on convenience instead of genuine connection. Your psychological constitution forbids it. But Jung noted something extraordinary about individuals who prioritize meaning. They become what I call evolutionary catalysts for human consciousness. When you refuse to accept anything less than authentic connection, you compel others to face their own lack of it. Sign 6. You have repeatedly outgrown people and environments. Jung said, "The greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents. But what occurs when you resolve to live a life that is fully lived?" Jung discovered a profound truth about psychological development. It is frequently a solitary path. You have probably known the sting of realizing that people who once understood you no longer do. This isn't because you've become difficult, but because you have shed layers of conditioning that are no longer useful. Jung referred to this as a cycle of psychological death and rebirth. The friends who knew the version of you that was smaller, that aimed to please, that silenced its own truth, they remember that person. Sometimes they wish for that version to return because it was safer and more predictable. But you cannot go back. Jung knew that psychological evolution is a one-way street. Once you have peered behind the curtain of social conditioning, you cannot revert to unconscious conformity. If people seem troubled by your growth and continually ask you to revert to your former self, comment, "My evolution is not negotiable." Sign 7. You create what I call a transformational presence. Jung said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But what if you are the kind of person who catalyzes transformation just by being authentic? Jung identified a rare trait in some individuals, the ability to create what he called a psychological holding space. When someone confides in you, they feel truly seen in a way that is rare. You don't just hear words, you sense the emotional currents beneath them. You don't offer simplistic solutions, you offer profound witnessing. You don't leap to judgment. You create an environment for truth to surface. Jung recognized that this level of presence is, in itself, a form of psychological healing. But here is what I have noticed about people with this gift. They often deplete themselves by offering it too generously. You become so adept at holding space for others that you neglect to ask for space to be held for you. Jung found something significant about highly empathetic personalities. They often develop what I call a helper syndrome, a pattern of unconscious self-neglect that ultimately benefits no one. The task is not to cease caring. The task is to cultivate discernment. Sign 8. You sense a purpose that is not yet clearly defined. Jung said, "Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." If you have a persistent feeling that you are destined for something beyond the mundane, Jung would identify this as the transcendent function at work. It is your psyche's innate drive toward individuation and purpose. You can feel it. That restless certainty that you have a contribution to make, something to create, something to express. It may be blurry now, but its presence is undeniable. Jung saw this as evidence of creative potential demanding to be realized. This isn't about achieving fame or accolades. It is about alignment, the psychological imperative to live in sync with your deepest self. Jung observed that people who disregard this inner call often suffer from neurotic symptoms like anxiety, depression, and a feeling of meaninglessness. But here is Jung's most profound insight about purpose-driven individuals. Your calling is not just for you, it is transpersonal. You are not just here for self-fulfillment, you are here to contribute to the evolution of consciousness itself. Jung dedicated his career to studying personalities like yours. He called people with these traits the differentiated individuals, those who have cultivated a psychological complexity that enables them to perceive, feel, and comprehend on levels Most people never will. But Jung also mapped the developmental stages for these rare personalities. Knowing your position in this process is vital for your continued growth. Stage 1. The unconscious outsider. You feel different, but lack the language for why. You exhibit the traits, but interpret them as flaws to be corrected rather than as gifts to be honed. You attempt to conform, to blend in, to be normal, but the psychological cost is immense. Jung noted that individuals in this phase often develop what he termed persona rigidity. They become so fixated on projecting an image of normalcy that they lose connection with their authentic selves. Stage 2. The awakening individual. You start to see your traits as potentially valuable instead of problematic. You begin to grasp Jung's concept of psychological types and recognize yourself within it. You commence the process of what Jung called shadow integration, reclaiming the parts of yourself you were taught to reject. This is when you stop apologizing for your depth and begin to claim it. You start establishing boundaries with those who want you to be less. You begin to seek out others who can meet you at your level of authenticity. Stage 3. The individuated consciousness. You have fully integrated your rare traits into a cohesive identity. You comprehend your purpose and live it with intention. You have achieved what Jung called psychological wholeness, the ability to be genuinely yourself while staying connected to the world. At this stage, you become what I call a beacon for other rare souls. You don't just live authentically, you grant others permission to do the same. You become a force for the evolution of collective consciousness. If you are ready to stop concealing your rare qualities and start embracing them, comment, "I am psychologically rare and proud." But Jung issued a critical warning that most people with rare personalities never learn. You must integrate your shadow, or your gifts will become your prison. What does this mean? Even rare personalities have unconscious aspects that can sabotage their potential. Jung identified several shadow patterns common to psychologically advanced people. The superiority complex, shadow. You start to view your rarity as a sign that you are better than others, not just different. This fosters isolation and arrogance. The messianic shadow. You become convinced it is your duty to awaken or fix everyone around you. This leads to burnout and resentment when your efforts are not welcomed. The martyrdom shadow. You come to believe that being rare means you are destined to suffer, that your depth necessitates a sacrifice of joy or connection. Jung knew that shadow integration is crucial for psychological health. The objective isn't to eradicate these tendencies, but to make them conscious so they don't steer your behavior from the shadows. True psychological rarity includes the wisdom to know when to share your gifts and when to conserve them, when to guide and when to observe, when to speak truth, and when to hold a noble silence. Jung made a profound discovery about rare personalities in relationships. They tend to attract either people who want to possess their light or people who are threatened by it. Understanding this dynamic is essential for cultivating genuine connections. The light seekers. These are individuals unconsciously drawn to your energy who have not done their own internal work. They want you to be their therapist, their guide, their source of validation. They admire your gifts, but not necessarily you as a whole person. The light dimmers. These are people who are unsettled by your intensity and constantly try to persuade you to tone it down, be more realistic, or stop overcomplicating things. They are often unconsciously triggered by your authenticity because it mirrors their own lack thereof. The light matchers. These are the rare souls who have done their own psychological work and can meet you at your level of depth without needing to either consume or diminish you. They celebrate your rarity while honoring their own psychological sovereignty. Jung discovered something beautiful about rare personalities who learn to navigate relationships with awareness. They become mirrors that help others recognize their own potential for psychological growth. The key is mastering what Jung called psychological discrimination, the ability to discern who is ready for an authentic relationship and who is seeking something else from you. But here is the insight from Jung that changes everything. With psychological rarity comes responsibility. You are not different solely for your own sake. You are different in service to human evolution. Jung believed that individuals with rare personalities act as bridges between the conscious and unconscious realms of human experience. Through your depth, your questions, and your refusal to accept superficiality, you help humanity evolve. This is why you cannot settle for the mundane. This is why shallow connections feel so hollow. This is why you prefer solitude to pretense. Your psyche is aware that you have a purpose, and that purpose demands authenticity, depth, and courage. But Jung also cautioned against what I call psychological inflation, the danger of believing that being rare makes you superior instead of simply more responsible. The key is to hold both humility and power. Understand that you are special without seeing others as less valuable. Your sensitivity is not a weakness to be contained. It is an intelligence to be utilized. Your intensity is not too much. It is precisely what is needed in certain contexts. Your refusal to settle is not being difficult. It is necessary for the evolution of consciousness. Jung made a startling prediction about rare personalities. As humanity evolves, more people will develop these traits. What is uncommon now will become more prevalent as our species matures psychologically. This means you are not just personally rare, you are evolutionarily significant. You represent what Jung called the leading edge of human consciousness. You are pioneering ways of being that others will one day follow. This perspective reframes all your struggles. Every time you felt like an outsider, you were actually charting new territory for human potential. Every time you were criticized for being too much, you were demonstrating possibilities that challenged limited worldviews. Every time you chose authenticity over social acceptance, you expanded what is possible for human relationships. Every time you refused to settle for shallow meaning, you raised the standard for what life can be. Jung knew that psychological evolution unfolds through individuals like you who refuse to accept current limitations as permanent. You are not just living a life, you are expanding the definition of what it means to be human. But this can be a lonely path. You are often treading trails that few others have walked. You are solving problems that most people don't even see as problems. You are seeking connections that most people don't believe are possible. Jung's final insight about rare personalities was both demanding and liberating. You must learn to love your rarity without needing external validation for it. The objective isn't to convince everyone of your specialness. The objective is to embody your gift so completely that you become a living testament to what is possible when someone fully embraces their authentic nature. This means accepting that some people will never grasp your depth. Some will be intimidated by your questions. Some will want to dim your light because it makes them uneasy with their own. But Jung discovered something beautiful about people who fully embrace their psychological rarity. They become magnets for others who are ready to embrace their own uniqueness. You do not need everyone to understand you. You need to find the few who can match your level of consciousness and build a life with them. The world needs your questions, your sensitivity, and your refusal to accept limitations as final. But you must offer these gifts consciously, strategically, and sustainably. You must learn to be both powerful and protective, both open and discerning. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." You are learning to do precisely that, and in doing so, you give others permission to accept themselves completely too. Remember what Jung identified about extremely rare personalities. The 8 signs we've discussed are not just isolated traits. They are evidence of an advanced psychological architecture. Jung wrote in his later works, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For people like you, becoming who you are means accepting that you function at a level of psychological sophistication most people never reach. Your emotional depth isn't oversensitivity. It's emotional intelligence operating at a high level. Your constant questioning isn't negativity. It's consciousness refusing to be confined. Your independence isn't isolation. It's psychological sovereignty. Your hyper-perceptive awareness isn't paranoia. It's intuition functioning at its peak. Your craving for meaning isn't impractical. It's your soul's demand for alignment. Your pattern of outgrowing people isn't coldness. It's evolution in motion. Your transformational presence isn't manipulation. It's authenticity, creating a space for truth. Your undefined purpose isn't confusion. It's potential seeking its form. If even half of these signs struck a chord with you, you are not merely different. You are part of what Jung saw as humanity's next evolutionary stage. You are one of the people guiding our species toward greater awareness, deeper truth, and more authentic connection. Yes, it can be lonely. Yes, it demands more courage than most will ever need. But Jung believed that individuals like you are vital for humanity's psychological evolution. Your intensity is not too much. It is precisely what the world needs to awaken from its comfortable stupor. Your sensitivity is not weakness. It is a strength that can perceive what others overlook. Your refusal to settle is not being difficult. It is essential for progress. Carl Jung spent his life studying people like you because he understood something profound. You are not just living your own life. You are expanding the very meaning of being human. The world does not need you to be smaller, quieter, or more convenient. The world needs you to be exactly who you are, psychologically rare and proud of it. If you are ready to fully embrace your psychological rarity and stop apologizing for the traits that make you extraordinary, comment below. I am evolutionary consciousness in human form. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded of their own psychological rarity. And if you wish to understand more about Jung's insights into the shadow side of sensitivity, check out my video on Final Warning to Empaths, They're Feeding on Your Light, where I reveal Jung's most unsettling discovery about how unconscious people drain the energy of psychologically advanced individuals. Subscribe, because we are just beginning to explore the depths of what makes you extraordinary. Remember, you're not too much. The world is too little. And Jung knew that people like you are the ones who change that. Thank you for watching. See you in the next dimension.